Hello, and a warm welcome to all my wonderful viewers. I am truly grateful that you have taken the time to watch and listen to my videos on this channel. Your support and presence mean so much to me, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. This channel was created with the aim of sharing stories, knowledge, and relaxing content that you can enjoy anytime, anywhere. Every video is made with care, passion, and a desire to bring something meaningful and enjoyable into your day, I hope you find inspiration, peace, and joy in the videos I share. Your feedback and engagement encourage me to keep creating. So please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Feel free to share your thoughts or suggestions in the comments. I love hearing from you and learning what you enjoy the most. I thank you for being part of this growing community. Together, we can create a space filled with positivity, learning, and entertainment. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy the journey with me. Welcome once again, and let's make this experience unforgettable. The faint glow of dawn crept over the rolling Tudor countryside. In a small village, the air carried the scent of dew-damp earth mixed with the faint aroma of soot from the night's embers. Mr. Jone, the village blacksmith, stirred from his straw-stuffed mattress in the upper room of his modest, timber-framed house. The wood beams above him creaked softly as he rose, pulling on a coarse linen shirt, its sleeves rolled to reveal arms hardened by years of hammer and anvil. His day began before most villages stirred, for the forge never truly slept. It simply waited for its master. With quiet determination, Jone descended the creaky stairs. His heavy leather boots muffled on the worn floorboards. He stoked the forge's dormant coals, the room filling with the warm, flickering light of the awakening fire. As the flames caught, shadows danced on the soot-stained walls, and the rhythmic crackle of kindling became the morning's first song. Outside, the village roosters crowed, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Jone's day had begun. The forge roared softly as Mr. Jone prepared his tools for the day ahead. Each hammer, tong, and chisel had its place upon the heavy oak workbench. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of labor, moved with deliberate care, oiling the metal heads of his hammers and sharpening the edges of his chisels against a whetstone. He murmured to himself, a habit from long hours of solitude, as the sparks from his grindstone leapt like fireflies. Nearby, a small wooden bucket of water stood ready for quenching, its surface rippling with each strike of the grindstone. Jone's apprentice, a young lad named Edwin, had yet to arrive, leaving the workshop bathed in quiet concentration. Outside, the village awoke slowly, but inside, the blacksmith's day had already gained momentum. The morning air carried a faint chill as the workshop door creaked open. Edwin, the blacksmith's young apprentice, stumbled in with an eager yet sleepy expression. His small frame was wrapped in a woolen tunic, too large for him. Cinched with a simple rope belt, he carried a basket of fresh bread and a flask of goat's milk, from the village baker, his daily contribution to the forge's breakfast. "Mister?" Jone glanced up from the grindstone, his sharp grey eyes softening at the sight of the boy's efforts. "You're late," Jone muttered with a faint grin, his voice gravelly but not unkind. Edwin stammered an apology, placing the bread on a rough-hewn table. The smell of fresh crust, mixed with the metallic scent of iron and smoke, a fragrance that seemed to define the forge. As the boy unpacked the basket, Jone handed him a set of smaller tongs. "Today, you'll learn to shape a hinge," he said. The day's lessons were beginning. Through the open window of the forge, the hum of the village slowly reached their ears. Women gathered at the communal well, gossiping as they drew water in wooden pails. A farmer passed by with a cart of hay, his ox plodding lazily along the muddy path. Jone paused for a moment, leaning on his hammer, watching the bustle with quiet satisfaction. Life in the Tudor village was simple, yet every day brought its own challenges. Edwin, wiping his flour-dusted hands after breakfast, asked timidly, "Master Jone, do you think we'll be making horseshoes today?" The blacksmith chuckled, shaking his head. "No, lad. We've a gate to mend for Sir Aldrich's estate. That's our priority." The crackling forge and the sound of the hammer striking iron soon drowned out the noise outside. Sparks danced like fleeting stars as Jone heated a bar of iron, its tip glowing orange-red. The day was now in full motion. The rhythmic clang of hammer against iron filled the workshop like a heartbeat. Jone's muscular arms swung with practiced precision, each strike flattening and shaping the glowing metal into the desired form. Edwin fetched coal for the forge, his small body straining as he shoveled pieces into the roaring fire. The forge hissed and spat embers, painting their faces in a golden glow. "Mind your fingers, lad," Jone barked as Edwin reached for the tongs. "This iron doesn't forgive carelessness." The boy nodded, gripping the metal bar as Jone hammered it into a hinge plate. Sparks burst around them, falling like tiny comets. The sound of metalwork became the forge's song, steady, purposeful, unrelenting. Outside, villagers passed by, occasionally peering in through the doorway to watch the master at his craft, mesmerized by the sight of raw iron transformed. The forge's door creaked open, letting in a rush of cool air. Old Master Gratham, the village elder, stepped inside with the aid of a wooden cane. His woolen cloak was flecked with dirt, and his weathered face bore the lines of many seasons. "Morning, Jone," the elder rasped. "Sir Aldrich needs that gate hinge by noon." Jone wiped his brow with a rag, nodding respectfully. "It'll be ready, Master Grantham." Edwin offered the elder a seat, but the man shook his head, preferring to stand as he watched Jone work. The elder's presence brought a quiet dignity to the forge. He studied the iron hinge forming under Jone's hammer, nodding approvingly. "No one in this village works metal like you, Jone," he said with a smile. The brief visit ended as quickly as it began, with the elder retreating back into the village, his cane tapping again. By mid-morning, the forge felt like the heart of a furnace. Sweat dripped down Jone's neck as he worked, the leather apron sticking to his linen shirt. The glowing iron hissed violently as he quenched it in water, sending up a plume of steam. Edwin, his face flushed, fanned himself with a piece of scrap wood, wishing for a breeze. "Get me the narrow tongs," Jone ordered, his voice steady despite the heat. Edwin rushed to comply, his small hands trembling slightly. As he handed over the tool, Jone dipped the iron back into the flames, turning it until the color was just right, neither too red nor too dull. The air smelled of hot metal, smoke, and sweat. Outside, the church bell rang, signaling the hour. Inside, Jone barely noticed. His entire world was the glowing iron and the rhythmic swing of his hammer. The clang of the forge paused as a stout merchant entered, carrying a leather satchel. "Good day, Master Jone," he greeted, bowing slightly. "I've need of new horseshoes for my mare. The old ones are worn thin." Jone set aside his hammer and wiped his hands on a rag. "Come back tomorrow, Bram. Today's work is for Sir Aldrich." The merchant frowned, but knew better than to argue with the village's only blacksmith. He dropped a few coins on the bench as a deposit. "Make them strong," Bram insisted. "The road to market is rough." Jone grunted in agreement and promised to have them ready by the following day. The merchant left as swiftly as he came, the scent of leather and spice lingering behind him. "Your turn," Jone said, handing Edwin the hammer. The boy's eyes widened as he stared at the glowing bar of iron resting on the anvil. "Strike it evenly, lad. Not too hard, not too soft." Edwin lifted the hammer with effort and brought it down. The clang echoed loudly, and the iron barely changed shape. Jone chuckled. "Again, with rhythm this time. Feel the metal respond." The boy tried again, his small arms shaking from the weight. Jone guided him patiently, correcting his grip and stance. By the time Edwin managed a series of half-decent blows, sweat dripped from his nose, and his tunic was plastered to his skin. "Good," Jone said finally, clapping him on the back. "You'll be a smith yet." As noon approached, the hinge was nearly finished. The once raw iron now gleamed with the marks of Jone's skill. Smooth edges, precise curves, and a sturdy structure built to last. Edwin stood back, admiring the transformation with awe. Jone quenched the final piece and held it up to the light. "There," he said, satisfaction in his voice. "This will hold Sir Aldrich's gate for 100 winters." Edwin grinned, wiping soot from his cheeks. Thus, the forge settled into a quiet hum as the two sat, briefly, to eat the rest of the bread Edwin had brought. The morning's work was done, but the day was far from over. The midday sun filtered through the open doorway of the forge, casting a warm beam across the dusty floor. "Mister," Jone set aside his tools just as the clatter of hooves approached. Sir Aldrich, the local nobleman, dismounted his chestnut horse with practiced grace. His finely embroidered doublet and tall leather boots made him stand out starkly against the soot-stained blacksmith and his modest workshop. "Master Jone," Sir Aldrich greeted, his voice crisp but polite. "I trust the hinge for my estate gate is ready?" Jone bowed slightly, his rough hands gripping the freshly crafted hinge. "Aye, my lord, strong enough to guard your grounds for years to come." Aldrich examined the hinge with a discerning eye, nodding approvingly. "You've outdone yourself again, Jone." As always, Edwin stood silently nearby, his young eyes wide at the sight of such nobility. Aldrich's commanding presence filled the forge, the faint scent of leather and horse trailing in with him. Sir Aldrich removed a small leather purse from his belt, the faint jingle of coins echoing in the workshop. "Your work is impeccable, Jone," he said, "but I trust this will suffice." He tossed the purse onto the workbench. Jone caught it with one hand, weighing it briefly. "More than enough, my lord. I'll see the hinge delivered and installed by evening." Aldrich's gaze shifted to Edwin. "And this lad? Your apprentice?" "Aye," Jone replied. "Edwin's got the makings of a fine smith, though he's yet to master a steady hand." Aldrich smiled faintly, amused by the boy's nervous stance. "Then I'll expect him to craft a horseshoe for my mare someday." The boy flushed red, nodding without a word. As Aldrich prepared to leave, he placed a firm hand on Jone's shoulder. "Keep your forge burning, Jone. This village depends on your strength as much as mine." By early afternoon, Jone and Edwin loaded the heavy iron hinge onto a wooden handcart. The road to Sir Aldrich's estate was rough, lined with hedgerows and small cottages. Edwin pushed the cart while Jone guided it steadily. The boy panted with effort, but his master's nod of approval urged him on. At the grand estate gate, the towering wooden panels stood weathered but proud. Jone knelt to work, removing the old, rusted hinge and fitting the new one with practiced ease. His hammer rang against the iron, the rhythmic sound echoing through the quiet courtyard. Sir Aldrich's steward, a thin man with a sharp nose, stood watching with folded arms. "The Lord will be pleased," he said curtly, as though the quality of Jone's work was beyond question. Within the hour, the gate swung smoothly on its new hinge, a testament to the blacksmith's skill. After the work was done, the steward invited them to a modest meal in the servants' hall. A wooden table was laid with bread, cheese, and pottage. Edwin's eyes widened at the feast, far grander than their simple fare back at the forge. Jone ate slowly, his rough hands cradling a cup of small ale. "Eat up, lad," he muttered, watching Edwin stuff bread into his mouth with youthful hunger. The kitchen staff, bustling with trays and wooden bowls, cast curious glances at the blacksmith. A serving girl approached shyly, offering them more cheese. Edwin's face turned bright red when she smiled at him. Jone chuckled quietly, his gaze softening for a moment. This brief respite was a rare luxury in a blacksmith's day. As the sun dipped lower, Jone and Edwin left the estate, the empty handcart creaking as they made their way back. The road was quiet, save for the chirping of birds and the distant sound of a mill wheel turning. Edwin pushed the cart with renewed energy, proud of the work they had done. "Master Jone," the boy said after a while, "do you think I'll be able to forge hinges like that one day?" Jone gave him a sidelong glance, his expression thoughtful. "Aye, if you keep your head down and your arms steady. Patience, lad. The fire teaches those who listen." They walked in silence for a while, the smell of distant wood smoke guiding them back to the village. For Jone, this simple journey was as satisfying as any payment. Lalian. The forge awaited them like an old friend. Still warm from the morning's labor, Jone hung his tools on the rack, the clang of iron echoing through the quiet workshop. Edwin collapsed on a stool, rubbing his sore arms. "Don't think the day's done," Jone said with a half-smile. "We've horseshoes to start for Bram." The boy groaned but stood up obediently. Jone handed him a pair of tongs. The fire was stoked once more, filling the room with its familiar heat. Sparks flew as Jone prepared fresh iron, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. The evening's work was about to begin, and neither master nor apprentice showed any sign of slowing. Zillion. The steady clang of metal returned, echoing across the darkening village. Jone gripped a glowing bar of iron with his tongs, striking it into shape with powerful, measured blows. Edwin fetched water and placed new coals into the forge, his small face glowing with determination despite his fatigue. "Shape it like the crescent moon," Jone instructed, demonstrating how the iron bent under his hammer. Edwin watched closely, committing every movement to memory. The smell of hot iron and ash filled the air, mingling with the distant scent of cooking fires from the village. Outside, shadows lengthened, but inside the forge, the light of the fire burned brightly. The forge door creaked open, revealing Margaret, the village weaver. Her apron was dusted with wool fibers, and her face carried a kind smile. "Master Jone," she called over the roar of the fire, "my shears need sharpening again." Jone nodded without breaking his rhythm. "Leave them on the bench, Margaret. I'll see to them by tomorrow." Edwin, ever curious, asked her about her day as she set down the shears. Margaret chuckled. "Busy as always, lad, but your master's work keeps us all moving." With a polite farewell, she departed, the smell of the forge clinging to her clothes as she vanished into the twilight. Lalian. As the last horseshoe was completed, Jone leaned against the workbench, breathing heavily. Edwin wiped the sweat from his face with his sleeve, proud of his day's effort. The forge, now quiet, radiated a soft heat, casting long shadows across the walls. "Good work today, lad," Jone said, clapping Edwin on the shoulder. The boy's tired grin was all the thanks he needed. Jone gazed at the tools neatly arranged on the bench, the fruits of their labor glinting in the fading light. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, but for now, the peace of a job well done settled over them like a warm blanket. Lalanen. With the forge finally cooling, Jone closed the heavy wooden shutters, locking away the day's work. Edwin yawned, rubbing his tired eyes. "Off with you, lad," Jone said. "You earned your rest." The boy waved goodnight, scampering down the lane toward his small cottage. Jone lingered for a moment, breathing in the night air. The stars had begun to pierce the sky, and the village had fallen into a gentle hush. He wiped his hands clean, stepping inside to his own humble home. The day had been long and exhausting, yet deeply satisfying. As he climbed the wooden stairs to his bed, the faint warmth of the forge lingered in his bones. Alien. The morning sun crept over the thatched rooftops as Mr. Jone stood in the cool air outside his forge, organizing items for the market day. Iron nails, freshly forged hinges, and small tools were carefully placed into a wooden crate. Edwin stumbled out of the house, yawning, his hair sticking up in all directions. "Come on, lad," Jone said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Market day waits for no one." The boy rubbed his eyes and hurried to help, lifting bundles of horseshoes and placing them onto the cart. The scent of baked bread and roasted meat wafted through the village as merchants began to gather their goods. Market day was always busy. Everyone, from farmers to noblemen, visited to trade or barter. Jone tightened the leather straps on the cart, ensuring their goods were secure. "If we sell well, Edwin, you'll have coin for a sweet bun," he said with a hint of a smile. The boy's face lit up instantly. The cart creaked and rattled as Jone led it through the winding dirt path toward the bustling village square. Edwin walked beside him, clutching a small pouch of nails, his eyes wide with excitement. The path was alive with travelers, farmers driving sheep, merchants carrying baskets of spices, and women with woven baskets full of vegetables. "Keep an eye on our goods, lad," Jone warned, glancing at a pair of mischievous children playing along the roadside. Edwin nodded, gripping the cart's side tightly. As they neared the market, the noise grew louder. Vendors calling out their wares, buyers haggling over prices, and the rhythmic clatter of horses' hooves on cobblestones. For Jone, market days were both exhausting and rewarding. He would forge not just iron but relationships, trading his craft for grain, meat, or coin. The market square was alive with color, brightly dyed fabrics, baskets of apples and pears, and wooden stalls stacked high with. Jone found his usual spot near the carpenter's booth, setting down the crate of iron goods with a thud. "Edwin, lay out the nails and horseshoes neatly," Jone instructed, his tone brisk. The boy obeyed, carefully arranging the items on a rough cloth. The blacksmith's wares stood out amidst the other goods, their metallic gleam catching the sunlight. Nearby, the carpenter waved at Jone. "Morning! Got anything special today?" "Hinges, nails, and horseshoes," Jone replied, holding up a hinge for inspection. The carpenter whistled softly, impressed by the craftsmanship. As the crowd began to swell, Jone's stall drew curious glances from villagers looking for sturdy, reliable tools. It had truly begun. A farmer approached Jone's stall, his boots muddy and his face weathered from long days in the fields. "Morning, Jone. I need nails for my barn repairs," he said, eyeing the array of goods. Jone nodded, weighing out a handful of iron nails. "2 pennies for these, Thomas." The farmer rummaged through his leather pouch and handed over the coins. Edwin observed the transaction closely, fascinated by the simple exchange of goods and trust. "Thank you, Master Jone," Thomas said as he left, tipping his hat. "Every coin counts, lad," Jone muttered, sliding the pennies into a small wooden box. "Pay attention. This is as much a craft as the forge itself." As the morning went on, more customers gathered around Jone's stall. Word of his quality work traveled fast. His hinges never rusted, and his tools lasted longer than anyone else's. A young shepherd bought a new hook for his gate, while an older woman purchased a set of nails for mending her pantry door. "Your work is always the best, Jone," said the carpenter, stopping by with a smile. Jone simply grunted in acknowledgement, his focus on tallying his earnings. Edwin beamed with pride, knowing he had helped shape some of these goods just days ago. For him, each sale was like a small victory, a sign that he, too, was learning the trade that kept the village running. A well-dressed merchant, his cloak lined with fine wool, approached with a critical eye. "Your nails are fine, Jone, but your price is too high," he said with a smirk. Jone crossed his arms, his expression unmoved. "My price is fair, and my work lasts. Take it or leave it." The merchant tried to haggle, offering half the price. Edwin's eyes darted between them nervously. Finally, with a sigh, the merchant relented, paying the full amount. "Never let them undervalue your craft, lad," Jone said quietly to Edwin. "Your time and skill are worth every coin." Jone stepped aside as an older woman approached the stall, asking for a small iron hook. "Go on, lad," Jone said, nudging Edwin forward. The boy's hands trembled as he measured out the hook and quoted a price. The woman smiled kindly and handed over a coin, praising his politeness. Edwin beamed with pride as Jone nodded approvingly. "Not bad for your first sale," Jone said. "You'll be running a stall of your own one day." The boy's grin widened, his confidence growing with every word. For him, this small moment felt like the start of something much bigger. By midday, the square quieted as vendors and buyers took their meals. Jone and Edwin sat on a low bench near their stall, sharing a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and a slice of cold meat. "Eat slow, lad," Jone said, chewing thoughtfully. The day's far from over. Around them, the sounds of laughter and the smell of roasted meat filled the air. Edwin watched other children playing nearby, but his heart was content to sit beside his master, spoken lessons of life. "Will we make enough today?" the boy asked. Jone nodded, wiping his hands. "Enough, and perhaps a bit more." After lunch, the market roared back to life. A farmer bought a sturdy latch, a baker ordered nails for his oven frame, and a traveling merchant requested custom hooks for his wagon. Jone worked quickly, his hands a blur as he counted, measured, and packaged goods. Edwin fetched items from the cart, his confidence growing with each customer interaction. "This is how you keep a village running," Jone remarked, handing a latch to a smiling farmer, "by building things that last." The stall remained busy, and coins clinked steadily into the wooden box, each one a small victory. As the sun dipped low, the market began to wind down. Jone gathered the remaining goods, stacking them back into the cart. Edwin carefully counted the coins, his eyes wide with excitement at the day's earnings. "You did well today, lad," Jone said, clapping him on the back. "Now let's get these tools home before dark." The square slowly emptied, the echo of footsteps and distant chatter fading into the evening air. Jone gave a final nod to the carpenter before turning toward the road. Market day had been a success, but tomorrow the forge would call again. The morning fog still clung to the rooftops when a rider approached the forge, his horse snorting and pawing the ground. Dressed in Sir Aldrich's colors, deep blue with a golden crest, the messenger dismounted swiftly. "Master Jone," he called out, "the Lord requires your services. A special commission, urgent." Jone wiped his hands on a rag and stepped forward. "What does the Lord need?" "A set of ornate iron brackets for the manor's new banquet hall," the messenger replied, handing over a rolled parchment. "He wants them finished within 3 days." Jone unrolled the parchment, examining the design. It was intricate, with delicate curves and floral patterns, a challenge even for a seasoned blacksmith. His eyes narrowed with determination. "I'll start today," Jone said, tucking the parchment under his arm. Edwin, standing beside him, could barely contain his excitement. "This will be no ordinary work," Jone murmured. Inside the workshop, Jone spread the parchment on the workbench. The ornate design required precise hammering, twisting, and shaping, far more delicate than the usual hinges or nails. Edwin hovered over the bench, pointing at the floral curls on the sketch. "How will we make that, master?" the boy asked, awe in his voice. "Patience and skill, lad," Jone said. "Every curve must be perfect. The Lord will expect." He selected the finest iron rods from his stockpile, running his hand along their surfaces, as though feeling their potential. Tools were sharpened and special shaping bars were laid out. "This job will test you, too," Jone said to Edwin. "You'll learn more these next 3 days than you have in months." Edwin straightened his posture, determined to prove himself. The forge roared to life, flames licking the iron as Jone heated the first rod. With practiced precision, he began hammering, the metallic clang echoing through the village. Each blow was deliberate, shaping the raw material into elegant curves. Edwin worked the bellows, pumping with all his strength to keep the fire hot. Sweat ran down his temples as he struggled to keep pace with Jone's commands. "Faster, lad, or the iron will cool," Jone urged. Sparks flew like golden stars as the blacksmith twisted the heated iron around a form, beginning the first of many ornate brackets. The room was alive with energy, filled with the hiss of hot metal and the smell of burning coal. Edwin couldn't help but stare in awe at the graceful shapes emerging from the anvil. "Your turn, Edwin," Jone said, handing the boy a smaller hammer. "Try to shape this piece. Follow the curve I've started." Edwin swallowed hard, taking the glowing iron with tongs. He struck timidly at first, the hammer glancing off with little effect. "Harder, lad," Jone encouraged. "Let the hammer do the work. Strike with rhythm." The boy's arms trembled with the effort, but slowly he began to shape the curve under Jone's watchful eye. Sweat poured down his face as he tried to mimic his master's precision. When he finished, the piece was far from perfect, but Jone gave a firm nod. "Better than your first hinge," he said with a grin. "You'll learn." By noon, the forge felt like the center of a volcano. The heat was relentless, and both Jone and Edwin were drenched in sweat. The sound of hammering had slowed as they paused to catch their breath. "Drink some water," Jone ordered, handing Edwin a wooden cup. The boy gulped it down gratefully, his hands trembling from exhaustion. They sat on the bench for a few moments, eating hard bread and cheese in silence. Outside, the village buzzed with its usual life. Children playing, women drawing water from the well. But inside the forge, time seemed to stand still. "This work," Jone said between bites, "is not just about strength. It's about patience. You'll understand that one day." After their brief rest, Jone began the most delicate part of the commission, the decorative twists and floral patterns. Using smaller hammers and chisels, he tapped with precision, shaping fine details into the iron. Edwin watched, mesmerized by the transformation. "How do you make it look like leaves?" he asked. "By seeing it first in your mind," Jone replied, smiling slightly. "The iron only follows what's already there." The workshop filled with the light, rhythmic sound of tapping rather than heavy blows. This was artistry as much as labor, and Jone moved with the focus of a painter. Edwin fetched water and wiped the tools, careful not to disturb his master's concentration. The door to the forge swung open, revealing Sir Aldrich's steward. His sharp features and stern demeanor filled the room with tension. "Narzektik, Master Jone," he said curtly. "The Lord wishes to know if his brackets will be ready on time." Jone stood straight, wiping his hands on his apron. "They will be finished by the third day, as promised." The steward examined the half-finished bracket, nodding reluctantly. "See that it is so. The Lord does not tolerate delays." As he left, Edwin whispered, "He's a hard man," Jone chuckled. "Aye, but a blacksmith's iron is harder." As dusk approached, the forge's light glowed brighter against the darkening sky. Jone worked relentlessly, determined to finish the first bracket before nightfall. Edwin pumped the bellows until his arms ached, refusing to slow down. The sounds of the village quieted, replaced by the constant ring of metal and hiss of steam. Each twist and curve of the iron brought them closer to perfection. Finally, Jone quenched the first bracket, steam rising like a ghost. "One down," he said, satisfied. Edwin slumped onto the bench, too tired to speak. Later, as they cleaned the tools, Edwin stared at the completed bracket with wide eyes. "It's beautiful," he said softly. Jone smiled faintly. "Iron can be more than strength, lad. It can be art." The boy ran his fingers carefully over the cool metal, tracing the elegant curves. He realized, for the first time, that blacksmithing was more than brute force. It was creation, as noble in its own way as any painter's brush. "You'll make something like this one day," Jone promised. Edwin's heart swelled with pride. Night fell over the village, the forge now quiet except for the faint crackle of cooling coals. Jone locked the door, satisfied with the day's progress. "Off to bed, lad," he said. "Tomorrow we finish the second bracket." Edwin trudged home, exhausted but inspired. Jone lingered a moment longer, looking up at the star-filled sky. Days 10. The life of a blacksmith was not easy, but tonight, with the first bracket gleaming on the bench, deeply rewarding. The morning air was crisp and cool, but the forge was already alive with heat. Jone had risen before sunrise, determined to start the second bracket for Sir Aldrich's banquet hall. Edwin stumbled into the workshop, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Fetch the bellows, lad. We've got a long day," Jone said, his voice gruff yet calm. Edwin obeyed, yawning as he pumped life into the forge. The iron rods were laid out, gleaming faintly in the early light. "Do you think the steward will be pleased?" Edwin asked. Jone gave a dry chuckle. "The steward? He's never pleased, but the Lord will be, and that's what matters." With a practiced hand, Jone placed the first iron bar into the fire, the glow of the embers already flickering across his determined face. The first step was shaping the frame. Jone pulled the iron bar from the flames, its glowing red surface hissing as it met the cool anvil. With steady, powerful blows, he hammered it flat, each strike ringing like a church bell. "Watch the edges," he instructed Edwin, who stood ready with the tongs. The boy carefully turned the piece as directed, the heat almost unbearable. Jone's muscles flexed with each strike, the metal slowly transforming into a flat, even frame. Sparks shot upward, casting fleeting stars into the dim light of the workshop. "This part needs strength," Jone said. "No hesitation, lad. The iron knows if your hand is weak." Jone picked up a small hammer and showed Edwin how to create the bracket's elegant curves. "It's not about force now," he said. "It's about control." He demonstrated by gently tapping the iron around a curved form, slowly creating a graceful bend. "See how the iron flows? It follows your rhythm." Edwin tried next, his smaller hammer clinking against the metal in hesitant beats. The curve was uneven, but Jone placed a guiding hand on his shoulder. Again. This time, let the hammer speak. After several attempts, the boy managed a passable curve, his face lighting with pride. "Good," Jone said, simply. As the second bracket began to take shape, a sudden crack split the air. The iron had cooled too quickly, causing a flaw. Jone cursed softly under his breath. "Careful, lad! You need to watch the heat," he scolded, though not harshly. Edwin looked crestfallen, but Jone quickly softened. "Mistakes happen. We start again." He tossed the flawed carving saw. He tossed the flawed piece aside and placed a new bar into the fire. The lesson was clear. The forge demanded both speed and attention. For the next hour, Jone worked with renewed focus, his hammer rising and falling like clockwork. Edwin watched silently, determined not to make the same mistake again. The rhythmic clang of metal drew curious villagers to the workshop's open doorway. Children peeked inside, wide-eyed at the glowing iron and flying sparks. "Is that for Sir Aldrich?" one of them asked. "Aye," Jone replied without pausing, his hammer striking with measured force. Edwin grinned at the attention, feeling a surge of pride. "Master's work is the best in the village," he boasted. Jone shot him a look but didn't correct him. He knew the boy's words weren't far from the truth. The crowd soon drifted away, leaving the forge to its steady rhythm. By midday, the second bracket was halfway done. Jone called for a break, and they shared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and pickled onions. "You're improving, lad," Jone said between bites. Edwin's eyes lit up at the rare praise. Outside, the village was bustling, merchants shouting, dogs barking, and the scent of roasted meat wafting from a nearby house. But inside the forge, there was a moment of quiet. Jone leaned back on the bench, his thoughts drifting to the banquet hall where these brackets would one day hang, holding up torches that cast light over noble feasts. It was work worth doing. The afternoon was dedicated to refining the bracket's finer details. Jone used small chisels to create leaf-like patterns, tapping with gentle precision. "See how each line must flow?" he explained to Edwin. "A single mistake ruins the design." Edwin held his breath, watching as the flat metal slowly transformed into something resembling a work of art. He fetched water, wiped tools, and even tried his hand at chiseling under Jone's close supervision. The sun cast long beams through the workshop windows, illuminating the delicate curves of the nearly finished piece. Margaret, the village weaver, appeared with a bundle of shears in need of sharpening. "Master Jone, could you spare a moment?" she asked, smiling. "Leave them there," Jone said, gesturing to a side table. "I'll see to them after this job." Margaret nodded, her eyes drifting to the intricate bracket on the bench. "That's fine work," she said softly. Edwin grinned, proud of his master's skill. The woman left as quietly as she came, and Jone returned to the task at hand. "Fall back to it, lad," he said. As the sun dipped low, Jone added the final twist to the second bracket. His hammer strokes were slow and deliberate, shaping the last decorative curl with masterful precision. Edwin stood holding the tongs, his eyes fixed on every movement. "Is it done, master?" he asked, almost holding his breath. "Almost," Jone replied. He quenched the metal, steam hissing upward in a cloud that filled the room with a metallic tang. Then he held it up to the light, a small smile on his lips. "Now it's done." The second bracket was complete. As twilight settled over the village, Jone and Edwin sat on the bench, admiring the two completed brackets. Their shapes were strong yet elegant, a testament to both skill and patience. "You've learned much today," Jone said quietly. Edwin smiled, tired but proud. Outside, the sounds of the village softened as lanterns were lit and people retreated indoors. The forge's warm glow flickered one last time before Jone banked the fire for the night. "Tomorrow we deliver these to the manor," he said. "Be ready." Edwin nodded, already imagining the noble banquet hall where their work would shine. The first rays of dawn spilled into the forge as Jone inspected the two completed iron brackets, each gleaming with intricate patterns. He ran his calloused fingers over the curves, checking for any imperfections. Satisfied, he nodded. "Lad, bring the cart around," Jone instructed, his voice steady but laced with pride. Edwin scrambled to obey, still groggy from sleep but eager to assist. They wrapped the brackets carefully in cloth, securing them with rope to prevent any scratches during the journey. The morning was still and cool, the village slowly stirring to life. A few neighbors waved as they passed, curious to see the blacksmith's new creation. "These will outlast us both," Jone murmured, half to himself, as he tightened the straps. The day's mission was clear: deliver the brackets to Sir Aldrich's manor without delay. The cart creaked as they set off along the winding dirt road to Sir Aldrich's estate. Dew clung to the grass, and birds chirped in the hedgerows. Edwin, walking beside the cart, marveled at the countryside glowing under the early sun. "Do you think the Lord will like them?" he asked. "He'd better," Jone grunted with a half-smile. "We've given him our best work." The path grew steeper as they approached the manor's outer walls. The estate loomed in the distance, its stone towers catching the golden light. Passing farmers nodded respectfully as the blacksmith and his apprentice made their way, the clinking of iron echoing with each bump of the cart's wheels. The manor's towering gates came into view, guarded by two men in livery. The iron hinges, once rusted, now gleamed with Jone's previous handiwork. One guard stepped forward. "Master Jone, Sir Aldrich awaits you in the great hall." Jone nodded, wiping the road dust from his hands. Edwin stared at the gate, awed by its size and the polished brass details. They wheeled the cart into the courtyard, where stable boys and servants bustled about. The estate was alive with activity, the scent of hay and polished wood in the air. "Stay close, lad," Jone muttered, as they moved toward the main hall, the heavy brackets clanking softly under their cloth wrappings. The heavy fraggats. Inside the grand hall, Sir Aldrich stood waiting, dressed in a rich doublet of dark blue velvet. His presence commanded attention, but his smile softened the room. "Master Jone," he greeted us thus warmly. "Master Jone," he greeted warmly, "are these the brackets I commissioned?" Jone inclined his head. "Aye, my lord, made to last and to please the eye." The lord examined the first bracket, holding it up to the light filtering through the stained glass windows. "Exquisite work," Aldrich said, genuinely impressed. "You've outdone yourself." Edwin shifted nervously as Aldrich's gaze fell on him. "And you, young man? Have you lent your hand to this masterpiece?" "Yes, my lord," Edwin stammered, cheeks flushing with pride. "Then you both deserve my gratitude," Aldrich declared. With Aldrich's approval, Jone set to work installing the brackets in the banquet hall. The walls, lined with tapestries and wooden beams, awaited the new ironwork. Edwin carried the tools and held the ladder as Jone hammered the brackets into place. The sound of hammer on iron rang through the hall, blending with the soft hum of servants, preparing for the upcoming feast. Jone stepped down from the ladder, wiping his hands. "Perfect fit," he said, stepping back to admire the brackets, now fixed firmly on the wall. Their elegant curves caught the light of the hall's tall windows. Even Aldrich looked impressed. "They're not just functional, they're beautiful," he said. As the last hammer stroke echoed, Jone stepped back to survey the work. The two brackets stood symmetrical and strong, their patterns resembling vines curling toward the ceiling. Sir Aldrich clapped his hands together, smiling. "Your work is a marvel, Jone. These will hold the finest torches at my banquet." Edwin stared at the brackets with a mix of exhaustion and awe. "They look like something out of a story," he whispered to himself. "You've earned this moment," Jone said softly, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. For a craftsman, there was no greater reward than seeing one's work admired. Sir Aldrich produced a velvet pouch heavy with coins. "For your work, Jone, and a little extra for your apprentice." Jone accepted the payment with a respectful nod. Edwin's eyes widened as the lord handed him a single silver penny. "For your efforts," Aldrich said with a kind smile. The boy looked to his master, who nodded approvingly. "Thank you, my lord," Edwin said, his voice trembling slightly. "May your forge always burn bright," Aldrich said before dismissing them with a wave. Jone tucked the pouch into his belt, his heart warmed not just by the pay, but by the recognition of their skill. Just as they were preparing to leave, Sir Aldrich called out, "Stay for the feast tonight, Jone. You and your apprentice. It's the least I can offer." Jone hesitated, unused to such noble company. "We're not dressed for feasts, my lord." "Nonsense," Aldrich replied with a chuckle. "You'll be honored guests, for your hands have shaped part of this hall." Edwin's face lit up at the thought of tasting noble dishes. Jone sighed, finally nodding. "As you wish, my lord." The servants smiled as they prepared to set places for the unexpected guests. While waiting for the feast to begin, Jone and Edwin sat in the manor courtyard. The boy's curiosity was endless. "What do you think they'll serve?" he asked. "Probably more than we could eat in a week," Jone replied dryly. The courtyard was alive with servants carrying trays, while musicians tuned their lutes and pipes. The smell of roasted meat wafted through the air, making Edwin's stomach rumble. "Try not to stare too much during dinner," Jone advised with a chuckle. "We're here to show respect, not to gape." The banquet hall glowed with candlelight as Jone and Edwin stepped inside. Long tables were lined with roasted meats, pies, and fresh bread. Silver goblets gleamed under the warm glow of chandeliers. Edwin's jaw dropped, and Jone gently nudged him to keep moving. They were seated near the head of the table, close enough to see Sir Aldrich's proud smile. As the feast began, music filled the hall, and the scent of spiced wine and roasted fowl surrounded them. For one night, the blacksmith and his apprentice were treated not as common tradesmen, but as honored craftsmen. The banquet hall shimmered under the warm glow of countless candles. Servants moved with precision, laying out silver platters and filling goblets with spiced wine. As Jone and Edwin entered, Sir Aldrich stood to greet them personally. "Master Jone, Edwin," he said, extending a hand. "Tonight, you dine not as tradesmen, but as honored guests. Your work now graces this hall." Jone, unused to such formalities, bowed stiffly. Edwin followed suit, nearly tripping over his own feet. The hall was filled with finely dressed guests, noblemen in rich velvets, and women in embroidered gowns. Their curious eyes lingered on the blacksmith and his young apprentice, but Aldrich's warm smile reassured them both. "Sit near me," Aldrich said, gesturing to seats close to the head table. "You'll have the best view of the hall you've helped adorn." The first course arrived with grandeur. Platters of roasted game birds, glazed apples, and bowls of spiced pottage. The aroma filled the hall, making Edwin's stomach growl audibly. "Easy, lad," Jone muttered, though even he was tempted by the sight of golden-browned meats and warm bread. A servant placed a plate before them, and Edwin's eyes widened at the sheer amount of food. "This is more than we eat in a week," he whispered. Jone chuckled softly. "Enjoy it while you can. Feasts like these are rare for the likes of us." Sir Aldrich raised his goblet, calling for a toast to those who build with their hands, whose strength and skill make all this possible. The guests echoed his words, and Jone felt a rare swell of pride. Stopit. Lively music filled the hall as a group of musicians played lutes and recorders. The noble guests laughed, sharing stories of hunting trips and trade deals. Edwin's gaze kept darting toward the musicians, mesmerized by their skill. "Never seen a lute before, lad?" Jone teased. "Not like that," Edwin whispered. "It's like they're telling a story without words." Sir Aldrich noticed Edwin's fascination and beckoned the boy closer. "Would you like to see the instrument?" he asked kindly. Edwin's face lit up as a musician handed him a lute for a closer look. "Careful," Jone warned, though he smiled at the sight of Edwin plucking a few awkward notes. One of the noblewomen, dressed in a gown of emerald silk, leaned toward Jone. "You crafted the iron brackets, did you not?" "Aye, my lady," Jone replied, bowing his head slightly. "They are exquisite," she said, her voice melodic. "They remind me of the artistry I've seen in the halls of London." Jone's rough hands tightened on his goblet, unused to such high praise. "I only did my best, my lady," he said quietly. Edwin, listening nearby, grinned from ear to ear. "Master Jone made them almost like flowers," he added, eager to share. The noblewoman chuckled, her eyes kind. "Your apprentice speaks highly of you," she remarked, smiling at Jone, who nodded with quiet pride. The second course arrived. Succulent cuts of venison, pies filled with rich meats, and trenchers of fresh vegetables. Edwin couldn't decide what to eat first. His plate a colorful arrangement of flavors he had never tasted before. "Try the venison," Jone suggested, slicing a piece and offering it to the boy. "It's a rare treat." Across the table, Sir Aldrich engaged Jone in conversation. "Your forge is the lifeblood of this village, Jone. Without you, none of us could build or repair what we hold dear." Jone inclined his head respectfully. "I only do what I can, my lord. The iron does the rest." Edwin listened, soaking up every word like a sponge. As the feast wore on, the conversation turned to stories of the village. Jone recounted the time a horse threw a shoe mid-harvest, Sapiseri, and how he and Edwin had worked through the night to fix it. The nobles listened with interest, some surprised at the dedication of the blacksmith's trade. "You see," Aldrich said, raising his goblet again. These are the stories that remind us how each hand, chistitation, noble or not, shapes our world. Edwin blushed when Aldrich praised his role, and Jone ruffled the boy's hair. It's true, Jone said. Every nail and hinge has a tale of its own. Sir Aldrich stood, lifting his goblet high. Tonight, I honor not just nobility, but those who shape the very foundation of our lives. Our craftsman, our blacksmith, and his apprentice. The hall erupted in applause. Jone, caught off guard, nodded humbly. Edwin's eyes sparkled with pride as he raised his own cup of watered wine. "Thank you, my lord," Jone said quietly, the warmth in his chest almost greater than the feast itself. The musicians struck a cheerful tune, and the evening's merriment rose to a joyous hum. The final course was brought out: honey cakes, sugared fruits, and small tarts filled with jam. Edwin's eyes widened at the sight of the honey glistening in the candlelight. "Go on, lad, try it," Jone encouraged. Passing him a slice of cake, Edwin bit into it, his face lighting with pure delight. "This is the sweetest thing I've ever tasted," he exclaimed, causing nearby guests to laugh warmly. Even Jone allowed himself a rare smile, savoring the richness of the feast. For a brief moment, the weight of the forge and the clamor of iron felt far away. As the plates were cleared, a jester entered the hall, juggling colored balls and performing tricks. Laughter rippled through the crowd as he tumbled and cracked jokes. Edwin laughed until his cheeks hurt, while Jone chuckled quietly, enjoying the rare moment of carefree joy. "Not every day you see such things, lad?" Jone whispered. "No, master," Edwin replied between laughs. "This is the best day of my life." The music swelled again, and some of the nobles began to dance, their silken gowns flowing in the candlelight. As the night grew late, Sir Aldrich approached Jone and Edwin. "Thank you both for gracing my hall tonight," he said warmly. "You are always welcome here." Jone bowed deeply. "It was an honor, my lord." Edwin, clutching his silver penny, could hardly find words to thank him. The two left the hall under a starry sky, the cool night air wrapping around them like a soft cloak. "Did you see all that food, master?" Edwin said with awe. Jone chuckled, patting the boy's shoulder. "Aye, lad. But tomorrow we're back to the forge." The feast was over, but its memory would linger. The sun crept lazily over the horizon, and Jone awoke with a mild stiffness from the night's indulgence. The sounds of the feast still echoed faintly in his mind. The music, the laughter, and the clinking of goblets. He stretched, his muscles sore not from forging, but from sitting in the noble hall for hours. Edwin arrived at the forge moments later, still brimming with excitement. "Master, that feast was like a dream." "I can't stop thinking about the honey cakes." Jone chuckled as he stirred the coals, preparing the forge for a day of work. "Dreams are fine, lad, but the forge waits for no man. Today, we've gates to mend and tools to sharpen." The smell of coal and hot iron filled the air once more, replacing the rich scents of last night's banquet. The first customer of the day was a farmer, dragging a broken iron plow behind him. His hands were rough and calloused, his face etched with worry. "Master Jone," he said, "this plow's given out on me. If I can't mend it, my fields won't be ready in time for planting." Jone examined the piece, running his fingers along the crack and the iron. "A clean break. We'll have it fixed before midday." He handed Edwin the bellows and began heating the broken section, sparks rising as the fire licked the metal. The farmer watched silently, hope rekindling with every strike of Jone's hammer. The forge roared, and Jone set the cracked plowhead on the anvil. With strong, rhythmic blows, he fused the metal back together, reinforcing the weak point with an extra layer of heated iron. "Hold it steady," he ordered Edwin, who gripped the plow with tongs while sweat dripped down his forehead. The clang of the hammer was relentless, echoing like a heartbeat in the workshop. "You see, lad," Jone said between strikes, "tools like these are lifeblood to the farmers. Without them, There's no bread, no market, no feast. Edwin nodded, suddenly realizing that the forge was as essential to the village as the fields themselves. By mid-morning, the plough was repaired, its surface gleaming from Jone's handiwork. Inspect it with wide eyes. "It's better than new," he said, handing Jone a small bag of grain as payment. "This will keep my family fed. You have my thanks." Jone nodded, accepting the sack with a humble smile. "Take care of it, and it'll last you years." Edwin grinned as the farmer left, proud of the work they'd done. "We really do keep the whole village running," he said. "Aye, lad," Jone replied, patting the boy's shoulder. "Hammer strike matters." Margaret, the village weaver, arrived next with her dull shears wrapped in cloth. "Master Jone, could you sharpen these? I've cloth to cut before market day, of course," Jone said, taking the shears. He examined the edges, dulled from long use, and set to work with his whetstone. Edwin watched closely as Jone demonstrated the precise angles needed to restore the blades. "Not all blacksmithing is brute force," he explained. "Sometimes it's about patience and fine touch." Within minutes, the shears gleamed with a razor-sharp edge. Margaret smiled gratefully. "Perfect as always, Jone." The sun was high, and Jone paused the day's work for a meal. He and Edwin sat on a wooden bench, eating bread, cheese, and slices of cured meat. "What's next, master?" Edwin asked between bites. "2 more hinges for the church door, and a few nails for the miller," Jone replied. "We've still got a long day." The boy sighed but smiled. "Better than being hungry," Jone laughed, patting his shoulder. "Aye, lad. A good day's work puts food on the table for everyone." The forge, though hot and smoky, felt like the heart of the village. The local priest arrived carrying a wooden latch. "Master Jone, we need 2 new hinges for the church door. The old ones are rusted through." Jone nodded. "We'll have them ready by evening." He selected 2 iron bars and began shaping them with broad, steady strokes. Edwin assisted by holding each piece as Jone twisted and hammered the metal into long, strong hinges. "Church doors must stand for generations," Jone explained. "We build these not for ourselves, but for those who come long after we're gone." Edwin's eyes lit up, realizing the legacy hidden in their craft. The miller, a burly man with flour dust in his beard, came by for nails to repair his water wheel. "Master Jone, I'll need at least 20 nails by sundown." "You will have them," Jone replied, heating thin rods and cutting them into shape with practiced ease. Edwin fetched the small hammer and learned to create the pointed ends under Jone's watchful eye. "Every nail must be even," Jone reminded him. Within an hour, a neat pile of sturdy nails sat on the bench. The miller thanked them, leaving behind a sack of fresh flour as payment. As the sun dipped low, Jone finished polishing the church hinges. He inspected each one carefully, ensuring that no flaws would compromise their strength. "Take these to the priest tomorrow morning," Jone instructed Edwin, wrapping the hinges in cloth. The forge's glow softened, and the steady clang of the hammer slowed to silence. Outside, villagers were already preparing for supper, the smell of roasting meat drifting in on the breeze. Jone stretched, his body aching from a long day, but his heart was content. As night settled over the village, Jone banked the forge's fire, ensuring it would be ready for the next morning. Edwin yawned, leaning against the doorframe. "Go on, lad," Jone said. "You've done well today." Edwin grinned sleepily. "I like fixing things, master. Feels important." Jone placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "It is important. Remember that." The stars twinkled overhead as Jone locked the workshop. Another day of hard work was behind them, but the forge would always burn again. The church bell tolled softly in the morning mist as Father Edmund approached the forge. His brown robe trailed slightly in the damp earth, and a wooden rosary clinked gently against his side. "Master Jone," he called, "the church needs your skill. Once again, the old candle stands have corroded, and the altar deserves something worthy of God's house. Jone wiped his hands on a rag, his expression serious. New candle stands, Father? Aye. I can make them strong and fair. Father Edmund handed him a simple drawing, a design of tall, spiraled stands with a cross at the top. They must be ready before Sunday's service. Edwin, who had been tidying tools, looked at the sketch with curiosity. We'll make them shine, Master, he said earnestly. Jone's lips curved into a faint smile. Jone examined his iron stockpile, pulling out the best rods for the candle stands. This work demands clean iron, he muttered, running a practiced hand over the smooth metal. Edwin fetched a measuring rod and parchment, jotting down rough dimensions as Jone dictated. 3 feet high, sturdy base, and a cross no taller than a handspan, Jone said. The forge crackled as they prepared the fire, the day's work already taking shape in their minds. Why spirals, Master? Edwin asked, tracing the design on the parchment. Spirals remind us of life's journey, lad. Always moving, always climbing, Jone explained. The first step was the base, a broad, heavy circle to support the stand's height. Jone heated the iron until it glowed like molten gold, then hammered it flat, sparks bursting into the air with each strike. Hold the edge steady, lad, Jone instructed. As Edwin gripped the piece with tongs, the boy strained under the heat and weight, but he refused to let go. Good, Jone said between strikes. Every strong base begins with teamwork. By midday, the circular base was shaped and cooled, its edges smooth and strong. With the base completed, Jone turned his attention to the spiral stem. He heated a long rod of iron and slowly twisted it using a special clamp and hammer. Watch carefully, lad. The twist must be even, or it'll lean, Jone explained. Edwin stared, mesmerized as the glowing rod transformed into a spiraling column. He attempted a smaller twist on a spare piece of iron, his own effort producing a wobbly, uneven curve. Close, but not yet, Jone said with a grin. It takes years to make iron dance like this. The spiral stem gleamed with beauty and strength, ready to be fixed onto the base. The cross at the top of the stand was the final touch. Jone heated a smaller iron bar and carefully shaped it with light, precise hammer taps. Careful, lad, Jone instructed, letting Edwin attempt the final horizontal piece. Edwin's strikes were soft, uncertain, but Jone guided his hand. The two parts were then welded together, and the cross was secured at the top of the spiral. Looks like it belongs in the church already, Edwin said, grinning as he stepped back to admire the work. Aye, Jone replied, eyes glowing with satisfaction. But we've another one to make. The workshop cooled slightly as Jone banked the fire for lunch. They sat on the bench, sharing bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and a jug of ale. Edwin looked at the half-finished candle stand with awe. I can't believe we made that, Master. It's only half the job, lad, Jone replied, tearing off a piece of bread. But it's good work, and the church will be proud. Outside, the village was alive with chatter, children playing near the well, and merchants calling out their wares. The forge felt like a quiet sanctuary amidst the noise. The afternoon was spent replicating the process for the second candle stand. Jone and Edwin worked side by side, the clang of their hammers forming a steady rhythm. This one must match the first exactly, Jone said. The church won't forgive uneven work. Edwin focused hard, shaping the base while Jone twisted the stem. By late afternoon, the second stand stood beside the first, nearly identical. You're improving, Jone admitted. Your hand's steadier now, the boy smiled proudly, his arms aching but his heart full. Before nightfall, Jone polished both candle stands, rubbing them with oil and cloth until the metal gleamed. No soot or rust must mar them, he said. Edwin helped, carefully wiping every curve of the spirals. They look like silver now, he said with a grin. They'll shine even brighter in the candlelight, Jone replied. He set them side by side, both proud and relieved to see them complete. Father Edmund would come by tomorrow to collect them, and Jone knew they'd stand in the church for decades. The day's work complete, Jone and Edwin sat quietly on the bench, watching the last light of day filter through the workshop window. "You've learned much today," Jone said. Edwin nodded, his hands still blackened despite repeated washes. "I want to make something like that on my own one day, Master." "You will," Jone replied with certainty. "One day, you'll forge something that lasts longer than either of us." The boy's heart swelled at the thought. The glow of the forge mirrored in his eyes. Night settled over the village, stars twinkling like sparks from the day's labor. Jone banked the forge for the night, covering the embers to keep the heat for morning. "Off with you, lad," he said, patting Edwin's shoulder. "Rest well. Tomorrow we deliver these to the church." Edwin yawned, rubbing his sore arms, but he smiled all the same. "Good night, Master." The forge door closed with a gentle creak, its warmth lingering in the air, a quiet reminder of the day's accomplishments. The morning sun broke through the mist as Jone and Edwin carefully loaded the two polished candle stands onto their wooden cart. Wrapped in cloth to prevent scratches, they gleamed like silver under the light. "Hold them steady, lad," Jone instructed. Fastening the rope securely, Father Edmund arrived just as they were about to leave. "Master Jone, they look magnificent," he said, his voice filled with awe. "They'll look finer once they're standing in God's house." Jone replied with a nod. Together, they set off toward the small stone church, the village path quiet except for the squeak of the cart's wheels. Edwin walked proudly beside his master, feeling as though they carried treasures fit for a king. The stone church stood in quiet dignity, its bell tower catching the morning sun. Jone and Edwin unloaded the candle stands at the entrance, while Father Edmund held the door open. "Place them by the altar," the priest instructed. The interior smelled of beeswax and incense, the wooden pews worn smooth by years of prayers. Jone's boots echoed softly as he carried the first stand down the aisle, setting it near the altar rail. Edwin followed with the second, his arms trembling slightly under the weight. "They belong here," Father Edmund said, his eyes glistening. "Your craft will shine during Sunday's service." Jone simply nodded, proud yet humbled. Father Edmund placed thick beeswax candles into the new stands, striking a flint to light the wicks. The flames flickered softly, casting warm golden light that danced along the iron spirals. Edwin's mouth opened in awe. "They look alive, Master," he whispered. "Aye," Jone replied quietly. "Iron becomes something more when it serves a greater purpose." The glow illuminated the altar, transforming the once dull corner into a place of quiet splendor. Even the priest's voice trembled slightly. "This is the work of hands guided by both skill and spirit," he said, clasping Jone's shoulder. Word of the new candle stand spread quickly, and by mid-morning, curious villagers gathered inside the church. Mothers with children, farmers, and even the miller came to admire Jone's latest creation. "Master Jone, you've outdone yourself," Marguerite the weaver said with a smile. Jone nodded modestly, though Edwin beamed at the praise. "I helped with the cross at the top," he announced proudly. The villagers murmured in admiration, their voices hushed in respect for both the craft and the sacred space. For a brief moment, the blacksmith's forge seemed to extend into the very heart of the village's faith. Father Edmund gathered everyone around the altar. He raised his hands in blessing, his voice calm and resonant. "We give thanks for these hands that forge not just iron, but strength for our community." He sprinkled holy water on the stands, and the droplets hissed faintly on the warm metal. Jone bowed his head, humbled by the priest's words. Edwin followed suit, his heart swelling with pride. After the blessing, the priest turned to Jone. "Your craft is a form of prayer, Master Jone. Never doubt its worth." The blacksmith, usually so stoic, felt a rare warmth in his chest. After the blessing, Jone walked quietly around the church, taking in the sight of his work under the glow of sunlight streaming through stained glass. The iron spirals caught the light like threads of silver. "You did this," Edwin said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. "We did this, lad," Jone corrected. "Every hand that holds the hammer leaves its mark." The boy smiled, understanding now that the forge was more than just a place of work. It was a place where something lasting was created. By midday, Jone and Edwin returned to the forge. The day's light was harsh now, but the forge felt like a friend awaiting their return. "Back to work," Jone said, pulling on his apron. "The church may have its candles, but the village still needs nails, hinges, and horseshoes." Edwin grinned, eager to get back to the rhythm of the hammer and fire. The boy now saw every piece of iron differently, as something that could carry meaning beyond its form. Together, they stoked the fire, the orange glow promising another day of craft and creation. As the afternoon sun began to wane, Jone worked on a small, personal project, a simple iron medallion shaped like a hammer. "What's that, master?" Edwin asked curiously. "For you, lad," Jone said, handing it over once it cooled. "A reminder of the first true work you helped create." Edwin's face lit up as he held the medallion close. "I'll keep it forever," he whispered. "Then wear it proudly," Jone replied. "It's not just iron. It's the mark of your start as a smith." As the day came to an end, Jone and Edwin sat outside the forge, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "You've come far, lad," Jone said, breaking the comfortable silence. Edwin fingered the medallion, smiling. "All because of you, master," Jone shook his head. "Because you have the heart for it. A blacksmith's strength isn't just in his arms, but in his will." The boy nodded solemnly, storing those words like a precious tool. Night descended, and the forge's fire dimmed to glowing embers. Jone stood at the doorway, looking over his workshop, the tools, the anvil, the iron waiting for tomorrow. "This place," he said softly, "will outlive us both, lad. The work we do here, it carries on in every gate, every nail, every candle stand." Edwin nodded, a quiet resolve in his eyes. "I want to make things that last, master." "Like you do," Jone smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Then you'll be a smith worth remembering." The door closed, but the warmth of the forge seemed to linger, like the legacy of all who had ever shaped iron within its walls. Thank you so much to all of you, my amazing audience, for watching and listening to my videos on this channel. Your time, support, and encouragement mean the world to me. Every view, every like, and every comment inspires me to keep creating content that brings joy, relaxation, and meaningful stories to your day. I feel truly blessed to have such wonderful viewers who are willing to share this journey with me. This channel exists because of you. Your support motivates me to work harder and continue improving each video I create. Whether you are here to relax, learn, or simply enjoy a quiet moment, I hope my videos bring something special to your life. Your presence is the reason this community continues to grow and thrive. I sincerely thank you for being part of this family. Please continue to share your thoughts, leave your feedback, and let me know what you'd like to see in the future. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. It truly helps this channel grow from the bottom of my heart. Thank you once again for watching, listening, and being with me on this journey.